Despite advancements in LED technology making TVs bigger, brighter, and less expensive, OLED continues to hang in there. LG's bread and butter class of OLED displays like the C5 may be the tech's best argument for why OLED isn't ready to ride off into the sunset just yet. LG's mid-tier OLED series, the C class, now in its fifth generation, the C5 reviewed here, comes in 6 sizes, ranging from 42 to 83 inches, all of them using LG's Alpha 9 AI processor 4K Gen 8, which features similar AI upscaling and processing claims that are currently popular among LG's competitors. Because the C5 is an OLED, each of its pixels is self-illuminating. This means it doesn't have LED backlighting, nor does it rely on local dimming or zones. This gives the C5 its true-to-life contrast and ability to reproduce absolute black without any of that pesky blooming. With a reputation for accurate color, gamer-friendly motion rates up to 144 Hz, and support for HDR formats such as Dolby Vision, it is no wonder that every time LG releases a new C-Class OLED, enthusiasts take note. The last time we had a C model OLED on this channel was way back in 2022 with LG's C2. Now, if you're considering a refresh of your older LG, you will be happy to know that the new C5 is a clear step up in design over the C2, and it is a definite improvement in build quality over LG's entry-level B series. The C5 is wafer thin around the top and sides of the screen. There's a modest square protrusion on the rear where the TV's hardware, speakers, and input-output options, which include 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, are housed. OLED displays tend to be thinner and more fragile than their LED counterparts, so you may want to have an extra set of hands during installation. However, I was able to install this 65-inch model solo. I mounted the C5 onto the canvas all-in-one soundbar in stand that we reviewed last October, which continues to impress us with its sound quality and decor-friendly versatility. It is a natural fit for the new C5, requiring no additional adapters or bracket modifications. In addition to the canvas, which I connected using an HDMI cable between the TV's HDMI ARC-E ARC port and the canvas's single HDMI port, I also tested the C5 using our Apple TV and Sony PlayStation 5. Both were connected directly to the LG and then hidden away inside the canvas stand for a high-end custom look. You don't have to use a separate streamer like an Apple TV, Roku, or NVIDIA Shield. You can use LG's WebOS to access popular streaming apps such as Netflix, Apple, Disney. You get the idea. I prefer using an Apple TV over WebOS because, well, I just still don't care for LG's Magic Remote, and similar to Samsung's Tizen, I find WebOS to be a little clunky and less intuitive. Connecting an Apple TV eliminates a lot of frustration for me, as it also allows me to control the LG using the more straightforward Apple TV Remote thanks to CEC, or Control over HDMI. When you first power on the C5, it defaults to its energy-saving picture profile. LG's Eco mode isn't too bad, but it's far from accurate in terms of its color and white point. Now, using a light meter and my VideoForge pattern generator along with SpectraCal calibration software, I measured the LG's out-of-the-box energy-saving profile in standard dynamic range and found it had a margin of error of 17 for its grayscale and close to 9 for color, which exceeds the margin of error of 3 for a TV to be considered accurate or, calibrated from the factory. Whether you buy an LG, Samsung, Sony, or even a TCL, profiles labeled cinema or movie tend to be good starting points when looking for an accurate picture without having to splurge on professional calibration. The C5's cinema profile was excellent, measuring a margin of error, or delta E, of 2.5 for grayscale and 1 for color, meaning without any added or potentially costly adjustments, the C5's cinema profile meets the definition of calibrated from the factory. Though, even with measurements this good, the C5's filmmaker profile measured even better, with a delta E of 1.3 for grayscale and 1 for color. That's pretty darn impressive. When using standard dynamic range or SDR test patterns and content to test and measure the LG's filmmaker profile, the results were near perfect every single time, with scores I'm more accustomed to seeing after performing my time-consuming calibrations. Switching the signal to HDR proved equally impressive, meaning that regardless of the content being viewed, be it HD or 4K content in standard dynamic range or newer films that might be mastered in HDR or Dolby Vision, the LG's image was objectively perfect from a color and grayscale standpoint. And before the more cynical among you start to type, yeah, but you got a cherry-pick sample from LG for review. I didn't. I bought the C5 reviewed here from my local retailer, and trust me, the only thing cherry-picked was the Amex I pulled from my wallet at checkout. While my measurements indicate that the C5 is as close to perfect from the factory as any TV I've seen in recent memory, it's essential that we put the LG's overall visual experience in the proper context, which means we have to discuss brightness. OLED TVs have become brighter over the years, and the C5 is no exception, producing upwards of 1,000 nits of peak brightness when viewing HDR content, albeit in small quantities and for brief periods. While the C5's automatic brightness limiter isn't as aggressive as what I experienced on LG's more budget-friendly OLED, the B4, when doing peak brightness runs, the C5 cannot sustain its max figures for more than a few seconds. Good news is that this automatic throttling of peak brightness isn't as noticeable when viewing real-world content when relying on the C5's factory settings. However, if you set many of the TV's tone mapping and/or dynamic brightness and contrast settings to their maximum, you may notice the dimming more easily. While the C5 can reach peaks of 1,000 nits and even a little bit beyond, I found its real-world appreciable and sustainable brightness figures to hover closer to around 600 to 700 nits in SDR and 800 to 900 nits in HDR, which is plenty bright for a darkened room as well as rooms with some ambient light. Now, if you had your heart set on using a C5 or any OLED in a bright room with a lot of windows, some of which may be aligned with the screen, the LG may not be the best fit. I can't say that it bothered me too much, even though we have a bright room. So as long as you can control the lighting to some degree, the C5 is plenty bright and very enjoyable. Oh, and it maintains its color, contrast, and luminosity off axis, not to mention has zero blooming, which is better than most LED backlit displays. AI processing is all the rage these days. How much AI is being used in a TV scaling, backlight control, and/or overall picture enhancements, that may be up for some debate. Nevertheless, LG touts AI-like features that are said to enhance and improve images in real time, similar to Sony. In my experience, the C5 takes some of these enhancements to an extreme, resulting in an image that isn't natural or filmic. For example, I was watching Mission Impossible 3 in 1080p and with all of LG's AI-based enhancements turned on, and the picture quality was not good. Tom Cruise's skin tones and texture took on a waxy appearance, kind of like an overly smooth facial filter from Instagram or TikTok was being applied. The same excessively smooth, almost cartoonish simplification could also be seen in the background foliage and buildings. It was just weird. Thankfully, you can easily turn these AI aids off. I recommend disabling them as well as placing the TV's other compression enhancements to low or off. And once I did that, the cinematic quality of the film returned along with its natural film grain, which I loved. And these processing enhancements also cause some issues when viewing HDR and Dolby Vision content. Queuing up scenes from one of my favorite trash reality shows on Netflix, Selling Sunset, revealed weird artifacting and strange outlines or unnatural shadows being added to objects and characters' edges as if to try and define them better. Never mind that motion also seemed a little less fluid and natural as a result, so I just turned the AI processing off and kept most of the display's sharpness, noise reduction, and just general enhancement settings to low or off, which resulted in the most lifelike image in terms of picture and motion quality. I find this show to be a pretty good torture test for most TVs. A lot of TVs, even past LGs, have made a monkey's breakfast of this show, but to my surprise, Selling Sunset looks about as good as it ever has on the C5 after making these adjustments. Gamers often look to OLED, which are known for their gaming chops. The C5 sensed my PlayStation signal and automatically launched into its game profile, displaying its custom quick menu dashboard. Although quick menus aren't unique among modern TVs, Unlike the C5's just general menu tree, the implementation of its gaming menu was pretty straightforward and responsive. The C5 passed all of the various PlayStation benchmarks with no issues, and when doing speed runs through The Last of Us Part 2, I detected zero lag, delay, or just stuttering. In fact, rapid whip pans within gameplay looked a little smoother when played back through the C5 than through our current reference TV, the TCL QM7K. The C5 handled the game's dark scenes without a problem. The contrast looked great. None of the details got lost, though when I positioned the TV in line with a window, it was harder for me to keep pace with the action on screen due to the screen becoming overpowered by the ambient light. But when lighting was controlled, the LG's brightness was more than enough to enjoy uninterrupted gameplay. While I still prefer the ultimate immersion of a larger screen, I will admit to you the LG is superior to our TCL in terms of its overall gaming experience. Aside from the C5 not being the brightest TV on the block and its heavy-handed AI processing, there are some other things to keep in mind when considering this TV. The internal speakers are okay, but not great. Sony's OLED TVs have an advantage in the sound department, and going off memory, I think Samsung may too. Not to say that you can't casually watch TV using the built-in speakers. You totally can, but for best results, you're gonna want to at least budget for a soundbar like, say, the Sonos Arc Ultra, or even go a little bit more upmarket and get something like the Canvas or Bio Soundstage. Lastly, WebOS and just the LG UI in general remains cute but clunky. I know a person's take on an operating system or user interface is mainly subjective. Still, like LGs of old, I feel as if it just takes a few too many clicks or waves of the magic remote to get to its settings, whereas other manufacturers have distilled features into hotkeys or quick menu options. Additionally, the notifications and prompts throughout the LG user experience can border on harassment if you don't dig deep to turn off every little option and setting designed to feed your eye holes with marketing materials and reminders. Now, to be fair, LG is not the only brand guilty of these practices. Samsung can be equally frustrating, but it is worth mentioning. Compared to the Sony A95L, which I know isn't the new hotness, the C5 is very competitive. In terms of image accuracy, including measurements out of the box, the LG did better than the A95L did back when we reviewed it in 2024. In my A95L review, I said that the Sony ranked among the best TVs we'd seen straight out of the box. Well, the C5 is even better. And while peak brightness was comparable, the LG is a little brighter across a broader range of content compared to the Sony. Now, I'm not sure if this mild increase in brightness will be appreciable 100% of the time, but in our tests and measurements, the LG's light output using real-world content and more edge-to-edge test patterns managed to have just a little bit more oomph. When it comes to our personal OLED, the Sony A95K, which we use in our bedroom, the C5 is better, and for the first time in 2, maybe 3 years, I've been very tempted to Craigslist our beloved Sony OLED and make the change to LG. Compared to LG's more budget-friendly B4, the C5 is an improvement in every sense of the word. While the B4 is shockingly good OLED for its price, the C5's build quality, picture quality, and just brightness are superior. True, the B4 does measure well enough that in certain situations, think bedrooms, offices, and other secondary viewing spaces where light can be controlled to a degree, its picture quality is good enough that, splurging on the costlier C5 may not be money well spent. But for one's primary viewing TV, the C5 is a noticeable improvement over the B4. And for those who have no doubt already let me know once again that I have reviewed the wrong LG, I'm sorry. I know LG makes a G5 now and that the G5 will undoubtedly kick the crap out of, everything. I get it, and we've all heard it before. I don't know if the G5 is better than the C5 because I don't have one. Maybe in the not too distant future that will change, maybe not. However, what I do know is this. I had the opportunity to buy the G5 when I purchased the C5, but when it came to my wants, my needs, and my budget, The C5 checked all the right boxes. So that's it. That is now my review of LG's new C5 OLED. What did you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. And if there's any more information that you'd like to know, please leave a question. You never know, could be answered in a future Unplugged. Until next time, though, remember, the only person who has to like the sound, or in this case, sight of your system or your television, is you. So happy listening, happy watching. Thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next video. Bye.